effort. Oh, thank you. We started this effort a few months ago, and we are working our way toward a water trail development plan, which we'll be able to eventually submit to the state for state designation. A little more housekeeping. If you have questions also, please put them in the chat as we go along, but at the end of the presentation, we'll have some time to answer all the questions, and hopefully we'll get some good conversation and ways that you can help us in this effort. So today's agenda is basically the welcome, and we will be describing what actually is a water trail and talking about the benefits and then how we go about seeking state designation for the water trail. As I said, we've started this a few months ago, so we want to bring you up to speed with the accomplishments that we've done so far. And then we'll talk about our next steps, our timeline, and then what this is really all about is how you can help and how you can get involved in this effort. And as I said, we will be having time at the end for any questions that you might have. So at this point, I am going to turn it over to Andrea. And Andrea, just let me know when you want me to advance the slides. And she's going to go through the information about state designation and what is a water trail.
Thank you, Wendy. So just for everybody's benefit, if you haven't met me before, I'm Andrea Ireland. I'm with a program of the National Park Service called Rivers Trails Conservation Assistance. And we are providing an assistance grant to ELGRO for the development of the water trail for state designation on the Lower Grand. I'm located in Ohio. Don't hold that against me, but I'm looking forward to helping out on this project. I've worked on a couple of other water trails, so I have a little bit of experience here in moving it forward. So, and also joining us is Patrick Lydon. He is the relatively new Michigan contact for RTCA. So you'll be seeing more of him in the future. So what is a water trail? I'm sure that the people in Michigan are fairly familiar, since you will see you have so many water trails. But for those of you who don't know, and for some clarity, I mean, really, couldn't any body of water be called a water trail? Because the trail, the water, is already there. Sometimes it's mistaken for land trails that are next to the river. That would be more like a trail by the water rather than a water trail. So Michigan DNR defines it as a designated route on a navigable waterway, such as a lake, river, canal, or bay, that is designed and managed to create a positive outdoor recreation experience for the user. Water trails feature well-developed access points, often are near significant historical, environmental, or cultural points of interest, and have nearby amenities. So that's what DNR says it is. But what really makes it a water trail as opposed to just a paddling route, it's all the pieces that create the user experience. A detailed map with designated access points, points where you should get in and out of the river, instead of someone's private property, perhaps. It also includes information about those access points, specific river information, safety education, signage, facilities, amenities, and someone to manage it. So there's a lot of benefits to developing a water trail, from taking just a body of water that you paddle on to making it accessible outdoor recreation for everybody. And just a few of them are listed there. There's so much opportunity that a water trail can bring to your community. Those are just a few of them. Next slide. The Michigan Department of Environmental Quality Coastal Zone Management Program and others started a a program back in around 2016. They provided a grant for the development of the following tools. So one of them was the creation of a website, michiganwatertrails.org. And they did some data collection and mapping, which is the map that you see there. And it just identified all the paddling trails that were in Michigan. These are not the state designated ones, but this was a compilation for the purposes of a conference that they had on Michigan water trails and looking at developing a water trail along the entire shoreline of Michigan. So they had the conference, they created a website, they did data collection and mapping, and then the grant also helped them to develop the Michigan Water Trails Manual. And I have to say that that is the gold standard for water trail development across the country now. Really, everybody is referring to the Michigan Water Trails Manual. And what was kind of interesting about that was that they developed this great manual, but they didn't even have a state designation program yet. So it was kind of the chicken before the egg. Well, the group of volunteers and organizations who put it together, they were working with the coastal communities, and they provided content to populate this map. So maybe not all paddling trails made it on here, but they were working with what they had at the time. And keeping in mind that they did not yet have a state designation program. So some regional trails did exist at that time, and some were still being mapped, and it was hoped that all of them would benefit from this Michigan Water Trails site and the Michigan Water Trail Network. Together, what these did was demonstrate the need for a state water trails program. Okay, next slide. So out of all of that work, they started to see that Michigan had a very robust outdoor water recreation activity. And they came to the realization that the state should have some kind of a designation program. Other states already had that in place, and they were seeing the benefits of that. So it's a fairly new program, a little more than 2 years old. And keep in mind that during that time it was COVID, so it's hard to really ramp things up in a substantial way. Several existing water trails at the time applied for, and 8 of them received the state designation. Essentially, it's a seal of approval that those water trails meet certain criteria to be elevated to a Michigan state designated water trail. And 2 of these are the upper and the middle, which you may be familiar with. So it's the goal of this working group to create the lower Grand River Water Trail to join those 2 trails in one, hopefully state designated water trail. And fortunately, we have the template of successful water trails in the upper and the middle to follow. We will be following that model for consistency's sake, that's hard to say, as we seek to join the 3 into one trail. And in the future, after the Grand River achieves that state designation, eventually they would like to apply for a national water trails designation. You can see on your screen that there are 4 national water trails designated in the state of Michigan. That is a great honor. That is a very serious vetting process. They don't give trophies to just everybody on that particular program. You have to have best management practices that fall in line with the national standards. So now we have a poll for you. So a poll should have appeared on your screen. Go ahead and answer that, and we'll see some real-time responses coming in here. It's like a horse race. Lots of people have paddled on a water trail in Michigan. Oh, we have at least one who's not a paddler. Well, hopefully this will inspire you to get out there and paddle. You've got these great resources right in your backyard.
Nice.
Looking good. We got 23 out of 23 that answered. Okay.
25. All right, I'll go ahead and, oh,
There we
yeah,
go.
go ahead and share the results.
Yep.
And there we go.
So quite a few of you have already paddled on the rivers on the Lower Grand, and perhaps you can see the value of the creation of a designated water trail and all of the benefits that come with it as we continue this work.
Great. Thanks, Andrea.
Certainly.
Stop sharing. Okay, I'm just going to build a little bit on what Andrea was talking about, what really makes a state designated water trail. And a lot of it is just making sure that it is a safe and enjoyable experience. The water trail development plan that we're working on right now will really include all of this information that anyone wanting to paddle. It puts the outline, putting the information in one place to then be able to sort of implement the water trail for users. So, we have, as Andrea said, and everyone, I think a lot of people know, we have lots of water here and lots of opportunities to go paddling around here. But, where do you get in? Where do you get out? How many miles between access sites? How is it going to be really a good experience for you? Just getting that clear information about maybe what are some challenges? Are there any hazards that need to be identified? And we also, as part of this meeting and what we hope to have, future meetings, really is to get the community involved and to be part of the process so they really understand how to embrace this and really make it an amenity and a benefit for their own community. So and I'm going to get into a little bit more detail of what's in this development plan. But again, that's kind of the first step of being able to apply for a state designation, is to have this development plan. So you have information about, even historic and cultural resources, educational opportunities, the signage, which is really important, and then that whole management of the trail itself. And I'll get into a little bit more detail later on. Again, as part of the criteria, once you implement and you have this water trail, it has to be open to non-motorized watercraft, which, so the watershed, the development plans for the upper are quite a bit different than we'll have for the lower. It's such a different river in the upper section. It's a very small stream that has consistent log jams, and how do you keep that trail open for users and safe for users, which is a very different type of management that we have down here, in the Grand River, when it's 600 feet wide and, kind of room for everybody, but making sure that it's open to non-motorized watercraft as well. The access sites that we'll be talking about, as far as being included in the water trail, will always be open to the public. And I'm sure a lot of people have their own favorite place where they like to get in and out of the river. But as Andrea said, it might be private property. It might not be an official access site, which is pretty typical at bridges. Those aren't necessarily official. And we want to make sure that people understand, which ones are public and which ones will be, and then who owns those. The data that we have, everything, everything will be posted on our website, but we also hope to have a lot of digital tools that either you can take out on the water with you, apps, MGROW, the Middle Grand has has developed some apps where you can follow along and exactly see where you are, but then also maybe waterproof paper type copies that you can take, on your trip. But just really being able to know where you are, where the next safe access is, or any portages that might have to happen. And then for a water trail, we really need that overarching organization or community to oversee and help with the management of the water trail and be able to share that information. So ELGRO is really taking on that role with multiple partners and hopefully everyone along the river, but being able to really kind of oversee and be able to share that information. Let's see. I am going to now turn it over to Josh, who's going to talk a little bit more in detail about the Lower Grand River.
Hello, everybody. If you're not aware, the Lower Grand River has been divided into 3 subsections of the river. The Upper Grand River, which is around the origin of Jackson, Michigan, the Middle Grand, which is around Lansing, Michigan, and the Lower Grand. The Lower Grand starts in Portland, Michigan, right where the Looking Glass River comes into the Grand River. Right here, the river is about 200 feet wide. It flows in a mostly westerly direction for 89 miles, emptying out into the Lake Michigan at Grand Haven, where the river sometimes can get as wide as 3,000 feet. The Lower Grand is a large river, is characterized by fairly low gradient and very slow flow, obviously with some exceptions around Grand Rapids, where there are dams, which leads to steeper gradient and higher flow. Major tributaries to the Lower Grand include the Flat River, Thornapple River, and Rogue River, which are heavily paddled on their own, as well as the Lower Grand itself is heavily paddled by recreational users. Next slide, please. So in the beginning of this project, we used data we collected from West Michigan Environmental Action Council, or WEMIAC, as well as the website Go Paddle, to locate 28 access sites that were currently in place along the stretch of the Lower Grand. We went to make sure these sites were actually there, and while we were there, we assessed them for varying variables, including parking, launch type, site amenities such as trash disposal, water access, or restrooms, if they had fees and other nearby attractions. And using this data, we then assess them as either A, B, or C, A being the best sites possible and C sites being the lowest, not the greatest, but still accessible for river activity. Next slide.
I'm going to stop sharing, and Courtney is going to bring up our interactive map.
So with the map locations that we picked out, we went to 28 different locations. There were a few more that we visited that were either under construction, are going to be future sites, or will be removed. So out of all of the sites we went to, 28 are what we have officially said right now are safe paddling locations. So I'm going to zoom in to each one of the counties so we can look at each of the sites. This map is interactive. It allows you to zoom in and out. We will have a very similar map to this at the very end for our paddlers. But if you would like to refer to this map later on, you can go to the Lower Grand River website, go to Grand River Water Trail under projects and scroll down, and here is a smaller version of that map. So just future reference, if you would like to use it again, you can. So each of these sites, there's not a lot of access we have found in Ionia, and we would love to either know if there were more sites that we missed, or if there were future sites coming in. We are going to map all of the future locations. So there's, I know a lot of plans for each of the communities that have like dream locations, and we would like to put that into our map just so people and paddlers can see more locations. I don't think it's necessary to click on each site, but to give you an idea of the data that we were collecting, we have a name to the site, so either whose location it's on, the park's name, and then we went through and added data for each of these little tables. And this will also work with the upper and the middle. It's very similar data that they collected as well. So it kind of will all blend together nicely so that you could continue on. As you know, the river doesn't stop when it moves from the middle to the lower. So I'm just going to zoom into each of the counties, give you an idea. If you know of more, please feel free to either put it in the chat, email any of us, check out this map on our website, zoom in. On our website, you can also click on these locations. So please play with it, give us an idea if you know of more spots. But like downtown, we have all of the classifications. So this is considered a B launch. It doesn't have all of the amenities, but it does have a nice launch that's easy and accessible for people to get from their car to the boat launch. And then here is kind of the end. So in Ottawa. But as you can tell, there are some gaps in this map as well. It could be that we didn't check the spot, but it also might be that there's not a location there right now for a boat launch. And that would be something that would be great to either put in your community's plans for development or just keep on your radar that might be something that would be utilized. I know there's some spaces in between these areas that might give some not paddlers who aren't necessarily willing to go on huge stretches a little bit of a challenge. So
I'm gonna jump in, Courtney, and just add that we invite you to put your information in the chat if there are access points on here that that maybe don't make sense, like why is that dot there? And you know, it shouldn't be there. That's somebody else's boat launch. It's private, or that got washed away in a flood. We want to know if the dots, the access points that are on there are in fact real and true and usable, and also what could potentially be missing. On a previous water trail that I worked on, we started with 70 points, and what ended up being on the map was 25 points, because those were the public ones, not just where everybody was getting in and out by a bridge. So if you want to unmute and ask a question about a specific dot, Courtney can click on it. But this is the beginning of looking at what could be added or taken out and verified. They already did some ground truthing on these dots, but are there more to be had? So.
Yeah, and this is kind of a working map as we go through. So we would love to add more locations, and we used two. So WEMIAC in the past had done a ground truthing a few years ago, and we used their information along with the Go Paddle website's information. So we might not have everything. So that's really why we're leaning on you, community members, to know some of these spots. That would be super helpful to get more in here.
I got a question if I can ask now.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing all this work, you guys. 2 points. There's a spreadsheet that you've given us that we're putting in some of this data. I assume you're transferring from that spreadsheet into this mapping. And so that's kind of your behind the scenes tool, right? That spreadsheet with all the.
Right.
So that's another place for us, besides like in the chat now, is to be adding information for each of the sites. So the question really gets into clarifying, and I'll ask more about that spreadsheet at the end, but clarifying the differences in access points that you really want to be mapped on this map, that these are understandably public, but they're formal, like where somebody would really be putting their points in and out, and versus landings. And we talked about this a little bit. If you look behind my visual here at our Roselle Park, we have a landing on the river versus a place that you will drive and park to. There's half a dozen points through our corridor by us and Kent County that are those kind of locations. So those are also what you want included, correct? That are not just a formal launch site.
I think we do want to know about them. and they can be marked differently on the map, but right now we're really focusing on, where you can drive to get in and out of the river. But as this evolves, like Courtney said, this is a working document. I think we're going to keep refining it and getting more and more information in it. So
I think, yeah.
and not
one of the-
everyone has that spreadsheet is just kind of working on with the steering committee right now. Not everyone has access to that at this point.
So one of the perceptions is that when we're mapping this from a car viewpoint versus mapping it from being in a boat on the river. And so, does that make sense?
It does. And on that website that Courtney highlighted, and maybe someone can put that in the chat again, the link, we also were able to hire a company called Terrain 360. And they actually have one of those 360 cameras, kind of like a Google Streets, that if they went the entire stretch. They've actually done the Middle Grand too. So you can go on that site. There you go. She's showing it now, and really zoom in to the river and get that virtual experience of paddling down the river. But it gives you a view of what the landing looks like, and so we kind of use this as well to identify some of the spots. So that's kind of, if you want to play around with that, it's a pretty fun tool to be able to float down the river.
Great, thank you.
Own. Yep. Okay.
And to answer for the landing sites, those would be more considered that class C. So we can show on the map the 3 different classes to give paddlers a better idea of, can I actually stop at the spot and get out, or can I just stop here for lunch or something?
Right.
This is Mike Morrison with DNR. You want to identify all the potential access sites, whether you classify them as A, B, C, improved, needs improved, whether it's a road end, or even if it's just a rest stop on a small island where people can get out and stretch their legs. We want to try to identify all those parts. On the map, we'll obviously show where the actual preferred access points are, but we also need for emergency services, as well as just needing to get out and stretch your legs if you're on a long segment or something. It's preferred to have a quote rest area about every 1.5 miles to 2 miles, or 1.5 hours to 2 hours paddling, depending on the flow.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, that's great information. And as I said, it's, this is a working document, so we'll get to all those different opportunities, and be able to map all of those.
And if you know of those locations, I'm going to put my email in the chat. It would be great if you could send me like flat logs or road crossings or something, just to give me an idea of where to add those, because that would be wonderful.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to start sharing my screen again. So I said I would talk a little bit more about what the development plan actually entails and what kind of information will be in that development plan. The first is really the introduction. What is a water trail? We'll talk about that, some of the goals and objectives that we have for the water trail. The area, some of the physical characteristics of the river, then talking about the overall condition and maybe the experience that people could expect on the river. And then one thing that we really need help with is keeping track of the liveries that are available to help, because not everybody has their own boat or kayak. So being able to make this an equitable type of opportunity. So what are those liveries? Where are they? What are the expected routes that the liveries will do? And so we really want to build that database as well to be able to share where people can get some of that equipment. The planning process, which is what we're in right now, talking about the background of how this came to be. We'll talk about our steering committee. We have about 12 people right now on our steering committee that agreed to help us really get through this plan and help with the information. Talking about these public meetings, doing some specific interviews with key stakeholders. And then some of the related planning efforts and resources. There's a lot of being able to look at the community's recreation plans that they create, that they have to submit to the state. What kind of information do they include about water trails, and is it in your plan? Because once you have this development plan, I think it adds another 50 points to some of your applications for the Natural Resource Trust Fund grants. So again, we want to make sure that the communities are included, and then being able to have that information in there. The water trail asset inventory, this is really all about the access sites. We talked about that, classifying the access sites. Where are there good ones? Where are the ones that might need improvement? And then, as Mike said, where are potential ones, or where would we recommend some for when there's a big gap? The signage also is really important, and that can be tricky with such a big river, being so wide. Where do you put the signs on the river? We are following the outline and the templates that the upper and the middle have, so it can really be a seamless experience, going down the river, but we want to be consistent so people get used to what they're seeing. But then coordinating that, because Ottawa County already has a really robust signage system. So how do we coordinate that so people understand, this is really one consecutive river system? And then talking about the maintenance requirements and who's responsible for that, really getting the ownership identified for not only the access sites, but just some of the river edges. Oh, we'll talk about opportunities, challenges, and general considerations. I feel right now one of the biggest challenges is, how do you get through downtown safely? We really don't want to encourage people right now, but once the river is restored and those low head dams are taken out, we want to identify where are those opportunity sites that some of the partners are working on to create a safe access site in downtown. And then if people aren't comfortable going in those sort of rapids that are being created, what is the preferred portage around those areas? So we'll always talk about those challenges and opportunities. And then really the recommendation section is looking at those access sites and what do we need to improve? How do we continue this on? What is a sustainability plan for making sure that the trail is managed and it continues? And kind of what we have existing and proposed. And then the appendices will have all of that spreadsheet that Mark was talking about, really defining the access sites with all the amenities and the description of each one of those sites. We have other maps just showing all the bridge crossings, where signage is. We'll have some cost estimates for typical kayak launches or ADA compliant launches, just some typical cost guidelines and designs. And then the maps, again, will have each section mapped. We'll have pretty detailed information about each access site. And if you want to, on our website, you can see the Middle Grants plan and the Upper Grants plan, or just go to their websites. And we're just going to follow that same template with maps and directions and aerial shots. We've been working with a couple partners who have volunteered their time to actually take wonderful drone shots and aerial shots and some photos of the sites. So we'll be able to include those in the plan. So our timeline, as I said, we started this a few months ago, but our goal is to really be able to submit the development plan to the state in April, and then be able to, I don't know, maybe Michael can explain this a little bit. I don't know the time frame of getting something approved and how long that might take, but you certainly don't have to wait. You can get out and paddle when you want. But we have been having monthly steering committee meetings. We are hoping to have more of these community input sessions. After this, you might be able to forward this to other partners or other people in your community that should be involved, talking about safety and all the other issues that are going to come up. We've pretty much completed the inventory of the access sites that we know about, but that will continue on as we develop the plan. And then we really wanted to have more sort of open houses for the public to be able to join and give their input. And we're planning right now to have these open houses in January. So we would have one in Ionia County, one in Kent County, one in Ottawa County, and just inviting the public, kind of an open house if we can meet, and depending on the situation, but to have a lot of maps up and people be able to write, just giving their input on their experiences. And so we have different ideas. If we can't do that, we have different ideas of how to do it virtually to still engage as much public as we can. So then we'll be writing the plan according to that outline that I talked about above, and then applying for the state designation. And hopefully in May, the weather will cooperate and we can go out and paddle. So I wanted to launch one more poll. Now that you kind of have an overview of what we are doing and where we are in this development process, we're looking to you for some help. So these are different ways that you could help and be involved in this project, but also if you have other ideas, so we just want you to, this is multiple choice. You can help as much as you want, but really the question is send me more information on how to help. So if you want to, somebody launch, and you can help as you want. And again, if you have different ideas about how you might want to help, we'll be reaching out. And also after this meeting, probably early next week, we'll be sending out a questionnaire to all the people that were invited, not only you, but others in your community. And if you could forward that, and it's just trying to collect more information about you, about your community, about what you see as a vision for this trail. So we'll be sending that out after this meeting, hopefully next week. A couple more minutes. So part of that, as I talked about the public meetings, how you can help in helping us promote those public meetings. Again, reviewing the access points, looking at verification and adding, ones that of in your community. Also, what's required in the development plan to submit this to the state is showing that community support. So it's either a support letter. We already have some resolutions from communities sort of talking about their support for this and how it fits into their own recreation plan or master plans. Also just contacting, recruiting other interested stakeholders to learn about this effort. And then hopefully we'll come up with some other ideas. That's great. So I think we could share results. So it looks like people are willing to help, which is fantastic. And I think the public meetings are going to be an important part of this to get the public involved, and just be aware, be aware that the Grand River, it's in their backyard. It's an amazing place to paddle and has some really great resources to be able to share. All right, so we'll stop sharing that. And this is my contact information. If you have questions for the Park Service, that's Andrea's information. I think Courtney put her email in the chat as well. So I guess we can, if you want, you can raise your hand and we can call on you if you have a question, or I guess Josh or Courtney, if you want to read out some of the questions that might be in the chat.
There was a few questions earlier about, once the plan is developed, would it be possible to add future access points to it after it's developed?
Absolutely. I think this is a working document. I think we just need the plan to be able to submit to the state, but I would imagine it would be changing, and that's the danger of printing out paper maps, because you might have to keep changing them, but we'll keep everything digitally and keep updating. And I guess if Michael, are there any specific requirements to update anything with the state once the plan is approved, if things change? I can put you on the spot. Maybe he's not there. Okay. Anyway, I think once it's designated, it's probably always designated, and we can just update our own maps. Any other questions?
I always have questions.
Okay.
Mark, the two of them in the planning schedule kind of goes into the designated, the time we apply. But there was also a longer range, I think, to that, where we were looking at eventually getting National Park Service designation for the whole river. And so maybe that needs to kind of be somewhere out there for stakeholders to look at in the big picture of this project. And then at some point, what do we do after April? There's
Right.
other pieces to that workshop that's then. So anyways, just that logistics of planning. But the other, and I looked kind of quick through who's here, but I didn't see if there was reps from the Thornapple, the Rogue, and the Flat. And it's really trying to get those part of this process in to start getting, you know, where are they with their own plans? I know the Thornapple's been working on it for a long time. There's a lot of energy going on with the Rogue River. And just kind of getting, you know, them kind of tagged into this. But as I'm like looking at this, you know, the mapping that we're doing, those are key locations that go into that routing, is where you connect with these other rivers, or how, if you're coming down those other rivers, how do you connect into the Grand? So it's a broader perspective that isn't what we're needing for the designation plan, but it is for the broader look at the river.
Right. And I think those will come out in maybe those public meetings, you know, when we have the, you know, Kent County, when we can have those maps up showing how the Rogue River comes in, how the Flat comes in, and the Thornapple. But, you know, we're trying specifically to sort of limit the scope right here, just so we can get the development plan for the Grand River completed. But you're right. I mean, it all feeds in, and we want to create, you know, but that's not our charge right now. You know, we're just trying to focus on the Grand. But yeah, eventually that would be, you know, that would be really great to have the water trail on the Rogue and the Thornapple and everything, and have it all connect.
That's all I got. Thank you.
Okay.
Wendy, maybe you could ask, I'm not sure who SLV is, but about the Spring Lake Village, they're having a new access launch.
Yep. SLV is Spring Lake Village. You're right.
Oh.
So, yeah, and that's a great example of something that's planned. And I don't know if we can put her on the spot, but does someone from Spring Lake Village want to explain what is planned for that area?
You know what? She just stepped away from her desk, but I can
Oh,
take that
okay.
question.
Hi, Elliot.
By way of explanation, we have a new development going in at Tanglefoot Park. It's a universally accessible park. So the kiosk launch that we'll be putting in there will be UA compliant. And that's, you know, going to be coming in the near future. So we just wanted to make sure that we were prepared to engage with you guys and make sure we were on this map, you know, as soon as we got it up and running. But yeah, any information you could send about that, that'd be great.
Absolutely. I know I talked a little bit about, you know, downtown and downtown Grand Rapids and what's planned for that. We are, you know, in partnership with Downtown Grand Rapids Inc. and the planning process that's happening down there. You know, they have some wonderful visions and renderings of potentially what the parks and those opportunity sites could be downtown. You know, the timelines are always not quite certain, but I don't know if Andy Guy is on, if he wanted to say a few words about maybe some of the planning and how this would fit in with some of the work that he's doing downtown. Put you on the spot, Andy, if he's there.
Happy to be.
Great.
put on the spot. Yeah, I'm definitely not getting into timelines and project implementation and stuff like that, but I would say that this effort here is directly aligned with and highly complementary to what we're trying to do in downtown, and certainly with the work of the Grand Rapids Whitewater Group as well. So they're very supportive of this effort. Hopefully we can put some more dots on there for access
That's what we're
points
hoping,
as
right.
we move forward. So just let us know how we can help.
Thanks, Andy. And I think, are all those renderings and all those opportunity sites, are they on River for All website?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep. So if you just go to River for All. Yeah, and they're great representations of how, incorporating the whole riverfront and really bringing people to the river. And we know that not everybody is a paddler or is going to be paddling, but people like to watch people paddle. And so, they've always said 9 out of 10 people, half of those will just love to watch on the banks and see what's happening. And these would be areas too that, accessible for fishing or wading and other opportunities for recreation. All right. Any other questions in the chat? Does anyone want to go back to that interactive map to look at that again and see any specific points that are of interest? Courtney, if you wanted to pull that up at all.
Yep, I'm pulling it right back up. Sorry, I exited out of it out of habit.
It's all right. And, please share this information. We do hope to have additional community meetings, as well as those open houses for the public. And if you need any of us to come to your community to explain this a little bit further and help you secure that letter of resolution or letter of support, we have some templates that you could use to create that. But it'd be great to sort of get that, if you're supportive, get it on an agenda in an upcoming meeting so that we'd be able to have that letter of support by the time we submit in April. And we'd be happy to come to your community and share this information.
The other thing is we'll be asking if there's anybody else that you can think of that should be involved, whether it's a paddling group or a community member or an elected official who would want to know about this. Drop us a line, put it in the chat, or respond to our email that we'll send out after this, because we'll be trying to generate support and attendance at those future meetings and open houses.
Courtney, can you go back to Grand Rapids and where the Rogue River comes in? This is just kind of an example of what Mark was talking about. So there's an access site there. And if you are paddling down the Rogue, you come out and you get into the Grand River and you have to paddle upstream to get to the DNR launch that's there to be able to get out. But Plainfield Township, that big wooded area that you see there, has just purchased a lot of that land, well, all of that land, and they are planning to put in an access, because the Rogue River, you can kind of see the mouth of it through the trees right there. They are proposing a couple different access sites, one right on the Rogue, so that you don't actually have, if you're paddling down the Rogue, you don't have to go into the Grand, you can go get right out there, and they've developed parking lots and trails. But then I think they're also going to add one along the Grand too, so you don't have to kind of paddle upstream to get to that DNR boat launch. All right. All right, and we are recording this, so all of the chat will be recorded. So if you have put information in there, it won't be lost. When we close out this, we will have a record of that and be able to either respond to you if you had more of a question, or follow up with you if we have questions about maybe some of the launch sites or access sites that you've mentioned.
Hey, Courtney, could you just maybe go down the river and click on those dots to give people an idea of what those dots, you showed the information, but so that they, like a little virtual tour, here we are floating down the river and we would come to this site and that site. Just to kind of put it in people's minds what types of locations we're looking at. Some of these may be familiar to you and some of them aren't. These look like they're all on public lands. This is where it would be really helpful if we had the paddling groups or the liveries involved to verify some of this information as well.
Will these eventually have keys from one, say, showing distances from class A to the next class A, upstream or downstream? So will paddlers be able to know how far it is to the next?
Yes.
Okay.
We will be able to add that. We didn't do that yet because we don't have all the access sites in there necessarily.
Sure,
so, but when it's done, and it's kind of, if you know, and that's what we're hoping on the signage as well. You know, when you come up and to a site, you know, you see the sign, you know how many miles it is to the next one, and kind of an average time of how long it would take to paddle that. And then one of the things we also have is, you know, how many miles to Lake Michigan. So it's kind of a mileage marker of, you know,
yeah,
how.
good to know.
Yeah.
Is there an overarching philosophy or safety sort of framework, which is an intent to have a takeout point every so far, you know, like the harbors, the state's harbor of refuge program, where they built over time and tried to put the harbors 30 miles apart or within 30 miles. So you could pretty well count on having a refuge out there. It may be that everything is so close and you have so many that it's not even, it becomes a moot point, but I didn't know if that was, you know, whether part of this effort will eventually involve trying to find additional sites, create additional sites that are not so obvious.
Exactly. So in Ionia County, I mean, Ottawa County has, you know, this is good spacing. You know, there's some short trips, there's some longer trips, but when you get to Ionia County, you know, it's a pretty long paddle sometimes between those.
Yeah.
And so that's something that we would identify, you know, especially if there's not, like Mark was saying, some sort of landing space or, you know, some other way to either get out or, you know, call for emergency or have access. So we'll be working very closely with, and that's something we can also ask from all of you, you know, who in your communities would be responsible for the safety. You know, if there were a river rescue needed, do you have the equipment, or, you know, what community would respond to that? So that's something that we'll be working closely with. And then, you know, what is that sweet spot of time on the river? You know, do we try to have some sort of access or resting point after an hour of paddle or a couple miles, you know, and I think that will all just following some of the standards that are out there. And I think that the Water Trail Manual kind of has some of those recommendations in there.
Great, thank you.
And I will say that, yeah, those are all good questions. I will say that it varies from state to state what the standard.
Uh-oh. Did we lose Andrea?
Oh, I think I'm back now.
Okay,
There.
I don't know what happened.
Happened there. But like in Ohio, they suggest that no more than 10 miles between access points. And
that's-
some of that distance depends on what the conditions are. Is it a slow flow there, or
Mhm.
is it quick? And also your experience. If you are an experienced paddler, 10 miles might not seem like much, but if you're a newbie, that's a really long way, and you just wonder if you're ever going to get there. And the other thing about safety, at least that we say, is that it's up to you to provide the information. You can't necessarily make the river any safer, but you can provide the information for your users to have a safer experience. Ultimately, it's up to them. And but by providing the information, that is your responsibility. What they choose to do with it is up to them.
Right. And as I said, this presentation and other information will be posted on our website. So check back on with that regularly. And then we will be sending out that questionnaire. And I hope that you can share that with others. And so we can really collect as much information as we can. All right. Does anyone have anything else? Any comments? Really appreciate everyone joining us today. And again, we'll have more meetings, more opportunity, but this is just kind of our first public public outreach session. So yes. All right, some great comments. So yeah, we'll stick around for other questions. If we don't have anything else, you can get off early and have an extra half hour of your time. But we'll stick on for a while and just maybe have some conversation. So thanks again. Thanks, everybody. Great. Nice.